You're live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is Chair Cynthia Wenstrom with the McDowell Sonoran Preserve Commission, and I'd like to call the meeting to order. We'll begin with a roll call, please. Vice Chair LaPat Palasco.
LaPat Palasco here.
Commissioner Steve Coluccio.
Coluccio present.
Commissioner Mark Hackbarth.
Commissioner Hackbarth is here.
Commissioner Lips. Commissioner Olson.
Commissioner Olson is here.
And Commissioner Smith.
Commissioner Smith is here.
And Chair Wenstrom is here. There are no public comments this evening, so we're going to move right into item number 4, which is policy process refinement.
Well, good evening, everyone. This is Croy. Hope you all had a wonderful Thanksgiving. And we will take you through this agenda item tonight, which is really an effort to see if we got it right with some of the comments from the last meeting on updating the worksheet. The presentation we'll go through is loosely arranged along the lines of what we might do for the council as well. We'll be spending a little more time on it, probably in the sense that we're getting your confirmation of numbers and things like that than what we would probably do with the council. The expectation is we'll probably have in the 15 to 20 minutes to present to council. So we'll go pretty quickly when that, and we'll work with the chair and the former chair, McKeegan, who has been with us before, and we will follow up on that. Right now, we're still tentatively aiming at January 11th for that presentation. Council agendas are always subject to change, so I make no absolute promises until we get a little closer to that date. But that's kind of the time frame that we're on. And so with that, I will start going through some of these slides. Again, this would be response to the council and their strategic objectives that they set out this past July. The one on the preserve acquisition opportunities and the long-term maintenance funding. And this is, yep.
Commissioner Olson here. Just a question on that second paragraph where it says evaluate a perpetual maintenance fund. Are we doing anything to evaluate a perpetual maintenance fund, or I mean, I don't feel like we're evaluating one. We're just coming up with dollar ranges that we need.
And so that goes back to the steps we're really taking right now are identifying the costs so that in a future dialogue, and this is where we've mentioned before the city treasurer and the city manager, the council is expecting to take on a broader look citywide at funding, taxpayer funding issues, and that this would become a piece of that. And so the direction is to let's identify our costs so that we know what would be the expectation of request. And then as the council in the future gets into a more detailed presentation on how to pursue funding for any number of things, not just the preserve, but any number of citywide costs, this would then fit within that overall strategy. And so I do expect it will come back, and there could be there may be multiple ideas, or there may be one idea, and that's one of those things. Again, we're looking to the council to provide a sense of direction of where they'd like to go, because that could involve things that require public votes, things that don't require public votes, but that's really their purview. So we need to wait for them to give us a little more of a lead on what we'd be looking for out of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. This, of course, is the summary of the key categories that we've been looking at, and we'll be walking through. This is the slide that we've used in the past to identify that we have the 2 existing taxes that are aimed at land acquisition only and land acquisition and improvements only. And so neither of them allow for maintenance and operational costs. And so that if we were to allow either those funds or other funds, we'd need voter approval if we're trying to do it through a tax. So, to the extent that's only one of many options that could be considered. And like I said, we would bring that back. This is the general time frame that we've kind of been working under. And again, right now, we're really targeting this, and I didn't update this on this slide, but it is targeting the January 11th. And with whatever update or direction we get from the council out of that, I would expect that we would then in the spring or first of the year or thereafter, be working on whatever feedback, comments we might have received from the council. And that could lead to submitting a recommendation. And if the council's looking to have a vote, the earliest vote they could have would be the fall of 22. The next option would be the fall of 24. If it's a request for a tax funding option. There are other things that might be a different time frame. So this just shows what might be the most aggressive timeline, but it could be something different than that. And then we'll touch on this. This, of course, the purpose of the preserve. And the next slide is the objective or the management objectives. And all of the highlighted words, almost all of them touch on the things that we are looking at. And so the commission early on said that these two documents are kind of the guiding light for this effort. And when we look at the worksheet that we had last time, very hard to read, I realize that's why we have you hard copies, but the guiding document for the commission is the ordinance purpose and the management objectives. And so that's what we've been working on in proceeding with this. And so from this worksheet, the last time, yes, we've done some updates to it based upon the input that you had. I'm not going to try and go through all of them here. We'll go through them as we work through the categories and get that. But just generally, we did the types of things of low, medium, high that were being talked about for the land. We also have a column in here of low, medium, and then high. And the difference of these first two columns is the low and medium is really in this column of new possible taxpayer funding sources. And the idea of the high would be that we'd look for matching alternative funding sources. Now, that could be other taxpayer. It could be a bond election or things that we talked about. But it could also be that we're going outside the organization, be it school districts, be it other organizations that may have similar interests that of science research in the Sonoran Desert, whatever that case may be. That was trying to identify that there is a range there. So that's the general format. So we moved the one-time costs out to the far side here and then put these in. I added or tweaked a little bit of language in here. I updated this language so that it's the commission has developed this draft of certain base cost, for the purpose of submitting to the council, and that what we're looking for is feedback from the council on these items and costs. So, and there's room to edit and work through the chair over the next, tonight or in the next few days. And that's really the sense that we were going for here. So with that, we'll start with question number 1 out of the 2 council strategic objectives, the land acquisition priorities. So this is the graphic that we've used before. And whether we use, again, back to whether we use exactly these graphics or maybe we get them a little more consistent. We've done a lot of presentations for you. And so some of them are in slightly different formats. So we'll have a little more time to focus on that. But the idea being here was some discussion about particular areas, both inside the recommended study boundary and outside. And the idea would be to take a look at those, identify any rating processes that we'd want to go through, and then prioritization and be able to come forward to that. These are the numbers that we previously presented that talked about what potential values aimed at the state trust lands to begin with that are up there. And so this range that we had based on different acreages and different values that might occur in an auction process, and then needing to add in a potential cost of debt service if the values are particularly high. So these are some of the things that I think could be used in a presentation, maybe differently formatted. This came from the city treasurer's office in the sense of the available projected funding in the upcoming years out of the existing preserve taxes that can be used on land or improvements.
Quick question for you, Corey, please. This is Cynthia Wenstrom. So 2 slides back, if you could, please, where we were talking about prioritizing land. Is that something you are looking at from the commission, or is this a conversation with the council?
So the idea here would be that the presentation of the council would be more about the value and the cost and what range, how big of a nugget would you like to go after?
Okay,
And what we would then use the remaining January, February, March, whatever time period, that working group
Mhm.
will pull those together and the commission. And that would be part of what we'd put together as a response to the council.
got it.
So that's the general idea, but it's kind of like, well, we could start a lot of work on this, but if the council has a value, wherever that range is, they're interested in us pursuing, we can then tailor some suggestions towards that. was
Makes
the
sense.
thought.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. So again, this was the treasures as far as what we have available. And again, we'll work on these. These are not well formatted for you guys have a better sense of them because the presentations we have, I'll work on some different ways of presenting options of land so that the council, it's a little hard to know where this is. You guys know it, I know, but we had those types of options. And then what we do is we come back to this. And so we're simply saying that we'd be returning to the council based upon whatever feedback they give us in the summer of 22 that would have a review of opportunities that exist within or outside. And then if they're giving us some sense of their comfort range of the low, medium, high here, we'd be able to go with that. So that's kind of the land acquisition summary. And I think it's pretty consistent. And again, I apologize if there were a lot of numbers that I had written on my notes from the last time. And so don't take what I have here as if something you want slightly adjusted, happy to make edits as we go through.
Any comments from the commissioners regarding the numbers? Yeah,
I did have a question. I did have a question about the previous 2 slides.
Yep.
So if you could go back to one of them anyway.
on the
Just
land.
Back one. Yeah, so this is the one where with 200 acres and the other was 500 acres. Do either one of those include the area which is zoned for resort?
Parts of it. This one probably has all of it. The 500 acre one, the 200 acre would not. And again, this was not meant to be, this was merely meant to be a representation of acreage that kind of ties back to that other chart that had the values so that you could get a sense of, it's a little arbitrary to put some number out there. And I wanted you to at least have a sense of that's the type of range. We had another one that I didn't include tonight, but we'll have something for the council that is just representative that, it's one thing to say, well, how much money are you interested in spending? And if they don't get a sense for, well, what that might relate to an amount of acres. So you kind of need both of them at least to sense that. But if they'll give us a sense of range, then we can work on what's the range of land options that are out there and bring that back to them.
The range that we've been hearing from the state trust department is 300,000 to 500,000. Is it reasonable to think that the resort area would be at the top end of that?
One would generally think that, and I'm not going to say that I don't believe that, but valuation on land has to do with a lot of different things. And some of it is how much infrastructure is already developed to that parcel. And so the more infrastructure that has to be developed to get there, and by that I mean water, sewer, streets, bringing in the power, bringing in the fiber optics, all that has to be factored into that. Plus, then where is the market at any given point in time? And I just want to be clear, the state's never said absolutely a value. They would use a range in discussions that Jason and I had with them in 300,000 to 400,000. But we added the 5 because it's an auction process. And so to the extent that you get multiple bidders that are interested in a parcel of land, and that's not uncommon with what we've seen with some examples of other state land sales along the 101, different type of zoning, but nonetheless, it was valued here, $10 million sold for $16 million. valued at $30 million, sold for $50 million. So that's why we put a range on this, that we're not going to negotiate a price. It would be an auction
Sure.
to achieve those
Thank you.
values.
Commissioner Olson?
Commissioner Olson, on this slide, the upper right, the 250 million plus, 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 is there a reason there's plus, plus, plus? Because that's like exclamation point shouting. Or,
I can,
that's
I
almost
can go with one, I can go with three. It was just because when we looked at that sheet, there were numbers that went well
they're
into.
way up. It gives an emotional response that I'm not sure we want to go. I just think we ought to say plus.
That's fine. I have no problem with that. Okay,
Okay.
anything else on?
On the land, any other comments, concerns, questions, or we'll move on to the more intricate
Okay.
pieces?
So the next one, we're into question 2 and the preserve operations and maintenance. And I'm not going to go through these. I'm not sure we'd even share this level of detail with the council, but we have, and we'd be able to have backup slides so that if a question is asked, we can drill down some. But again, we're going to have a much shorter time period
Right.
than what we've had with you over the past couple of years. And so we're going to have to keep that in mind as we go through this. But I just wanted to remind you all that we've been through this level of
Yeah.
detail. This kind of summarizes then that, we're looking at those historic costs that take care of keeping the trailheads and trails clean and maintained, and maps and signs and things of that. And then we had the volunteer support line, and then we had the projected management. Now, one thing that I did as we looked at trying to keep this clean and a little bit smoother, we did have a range on volunteer of 125 to 150, but we thought for smoothness, because everything else was already at a set number, we just slipped that in and went with a higher number.
It's volunteer support anyway. So
That's right.
right.
And so, but I didn't want you to think that I was slipping one by you. I did that in a couple places here. So I just wanted you to be aware that we did that. So that then shows up in this part of the table. We have those numbers, same numbers I just showed you are there. And, under the match, there's not a lot of match likelihood for cleaning restrooms and things like that. There is some trail maintenance. So that one's noted on here. And then we did include under the volunteer support that the benefits of that are that we have the value of the volunteers, and that number changes year to year. And so we picked a number. It could be higher, it could be lower. Probably in the future, it'll continue to be higher. But I didn't want to overinflate things, but that's what we have showing there, just for reference.
Yeah.
That everybody understands that.
Question for Justin. Is that more dependent on how much work needs to be done, or is that dependent on how many volunteers we have?
That number is, and the reason we picked it is it's actually on the lower end of our numbers. So it's usually about 1.6 to 1.7. And that is the regular volunteer services for our master services agreement with the city. So pathfinders, patrollers, all of those. So that is that would probably consistently be the lowest that it would be. In COVID, when we suspended a lot of our services, it was around 1.4. So excess would be expected.
And that number does come from, I forget which federal agency puts a value every year that we can assign to volunteer hours, and then the number of hours. And that number tends to, the multiplier every year goes up a little bit, cost of living or
Sure,
something
of
in there.
course.
So that's why we're pretty comfortable on the low end that this is a good range.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Commissioner Olson.
Commissioner Olson for Justin. I was looking at this because you presented a potential benefit savings when you presented the Soden model of staff. Is that double counting? Because this is counted up here under like an operational expense, or is this representative of the same money that we were talking about?
This would be excluded from what we're talking about with Soden and all of those, because Soden would be expanding the model. So to your point, this number would probably go up if we attracted more volunteers and they did more hours, because this number is based off of services that we didn't include in Soden and education.
So if we went forward with the Soden model and expecting conservancy effort put into it, you would have to actually expand the number of volunteers in the conservancy or grow the number.
Most likely, we'd probably grow the number of participants because a lot of our stewards are always looking for more projects than we have. So we probably wouldn't need to expand the amount of stewards as much, but it would expand the amount of work they're doing because of the folks that want to do more.
Thank you.
Next.
So I didn't hear anything that suggests we've got continued comfort with these numbers. They had it last time, and we'll move on.
Yes, I'm hearing comfort around the room.
So research and education, this where we spent a lot of time talking the last time about those numbers. Again, for presentation of the council, and I just stole a few of Justin's slides, we'll probably work on editing some of that down, but certainly youth programs, multi-generational programs, public programs, a lot of great, things and outreach, just some of those examples so that the council has an understanding of what it is we're talking about in some of this. And I'm probably missing some things because I'm shortening them up, and we'll go back through and look at it more closely. This is some of the language that we have, that's identifying that, there's digital and print-based efforts. And so we'll look at cleaning this up a little bit. But this is really where we're focusing on that. And then I'll run through research real quick, and then we can talk about the entire category. So very similarly, we had a lot of presentations, and there's a lot of depth behind this that won't get fully covered when you go back to the presentations of Tiffany from a year ago that were whole meeting or, a good 15-minute presentations. We could spend a lot of time on this, but the importance of scientific research to the preserve, the variety of animals and the habitats, and the challenge of use and preservation and education and engagement all coming out. And some of the key areas of restoration, the non-native plants, the protecting biodiversity, and the habitat connectivity. Again, I picked a selection. We may be able to do a better job getting a full range identified with a few slides here, but I was just dealing that. And then this was the slide that we spent time on last time. And what we've done in transitioning that, and let me go to this slide really, because what we've then done is we have the low to medium categories. And again, this is what I'm kind of titled as costs for possible new funding source. And then we have in red, the target of possible matching funds in here. And then that leads to really if you take that and add it to either of these, then you could reach somewhere into this range here on these two categories. So that was kind of the high range. And again, there were a lot of different numbers that were talked about. And if I didn't quite get them right, again, we can tweak that. The one thing that as I looked at it, and I kind of did this the last time, education and research shows up in a number of different areas. There'll be elements in all of these different areas that will have some level of tie to the education and research. And as I started looking at it, we might actually be a little high in these two categories here, because I think some of it may be being picked up in some of these areas, but it's a minor point. And I just, as I went back through and after I'd done this chart and put it into the PowerPoint, I'm going, man, it might've been a little high, but I just, and I'm not trying to change it.
Right.
I think it's perfectly fine, but I just wanted to be aware that as I look back and go back to what we had in here and the targets we had with, the kind of the current and projected with stewards and other costs, some of these were built into that. Well, that's in some of those other categories. So it's not, I don't think terribly critical one way or the other, but it was an observation that I kind of hit on, and I didn't have time to call Justin, but he and I can spend some more quality time going through these numbers.
We
And,
actually addressed that at our last meeting, that we knew that there were pieces of these
Yep.
things that were throughout. But I think we've all come to the decision and comfort level that having a range is the right way to go. So we're not, it's not like we're saying this is the number. This is still
Yeah.
a range. So I think that we're fine with this. If I'm looking around the table. Yes, Vice Chair Palasco.
Hey, thank you. Croy, thanks a lot. So I've been talking with some of our colleagues and humans on the planet Earth. And so I'm going to kind of throw out a semi, well, I don't want to say radical, but different perspective on this. And so I think the word research is a word that can push a lot of hot buttons with the citizens. Because I think most citizens are like, why is my tax dollars going for research? So I think I'm going to propose a different idea, which really it's still research money, but I'm thinking that it might be more palatable if we talk about sustainability understanding or focus on sustainability of the preserve. We're not doing research, although we could, it's all, this is all academic in my humble opinion. But if you talk to many citizens in those in Scottsdale and some people I know, they're like, I don't want my, but what we need them to explain is that we're gathering information so we can maintain the sustainability of the preserve in perpetuity. So this information is critical information. This is not research just for the sake of doing research. It's information. So I'm just trying to make it so we're sensitive to how we might want to present this to the council and to the
So
citizens
your
of,
preferred verbiage would be exactly what then, instead of the word research?
I would say, sustainability understanding, something like some variation on that
Mhm.
theme.
And if I could just point you to one thing
Mhm.
on the top of the page, the first arrow up there says primary guiding document. The second is the key goal of the effort of the commission
Yeah.
is
Exactly.
to assure long-term sustainability of the preserve
Exactly.
for the next 25 years. and
Exactly.
beyond. So you have that kind of built in, and we might be able to, I think research may still be true in some ways, and we can work on maybe some language that would suggest that the research is aimed at, and I think that's true of many of the slides that the Conservancy brought, is that we are looking to assure long-term
Absolutely.
protection of the habitat and the various flora and fauna,
Right.
et cetera, that are out there. So we may be able to, this is where we probably haven't focused as much on the refinement of
Yeah.
this language here.
Mhm.
And I think knowing that we have a limited amount of time.
Yeah.
And my recommendation would be, you can kind of give direction to the chair to work with us, and we can do that. And not worry as much about that it has to be all perfect for the council, but whatever direction we get back from the council, we can then spend more time
Sure.
on that, would be my suggestion. Because I think the commission already gave us that direction. And we may not, we've been so focused on the numbers, and we
Sure.
haven't come back and focused on a lot of the stuff that's over on the left half of the sheet.
And this was just an idea. It's
Right.
not saying that I'm
Yeah.
right.
Well,
Yeah.
I see
I'm
a
just-
value though in using the
Just
word
throw-
sustainability because it does tie back to what our goals are. And that's the whole purpose of our ordinance is sustainability of the preserve. So to be consistent with language, yes, of course, we are researching so that we have data. But the bottom line is what we're doing is keeping it we're keeping this a sustainable preserve. Justin, do you have comments to weigh in on that?
Hi. As someone who navigates this daily out in the public world, it's odd because sustainability is quite often has become such a hot button term because it means so many things that it could have just as visceral a response. I will use an example of one of our partners at ASU just went through a program and renamed it from the School of Sustainability to the School of Global Futures. And it was specifically because sustainability has become so nebulous that people don't think that it's forward moving. But the second you brought it up, the other term that I quite often use when describing the work we do is our scientific research and study is to further the preservation of the preserve. So if we want to look at, as Corey pointed out, fine tuning this, it could very much be preservation and education. it could be things like that.
Any comment? Yes, Commissioner Olson?
Yeah, I was thinking the same, Lori and I have the same thoughts going on. And I see where you broke out monitoring for if you can go back to that sheet. On the bottom here, monitoring assessment for the 3 above, invasive wildlife and restoration. I think I'm thinking the same comment on the research side, because I think there is research. And research is science, and it is investigation, and it's just, I forget the words you just used, Justin, but it does that. Whereas things like SODN is a very clear model where we're trying to ensure the sustainability in the future, that the wildlife is there, the flora and the fauna is there, and it's monitored. And so to me, that's a very specific function. Is it research? Yeah, it probably is research, but I think there's more research that the Conservancy may want to get involved with beyond just the monitoring. I think, the focus I've been on is to monitor. And I wonder if we split research into even 2 buckets, and one being either sustainability and the other one being the verbiage that Justin talked about.
Well, and that's a
Preservation.
great thing to articulate that I know Croy and Scott and I have talked about a lot. When we look at the alternate fund potential column, that one's really where that greater research lives beyond, where what we're looking at as the commission is the preservation of the preserve. And because the preserve is our amazing outdoor classroom and laboratory, that's why we're able to leverage it for the matching our alternate funds for the greater good. Croy articulated it perfectly. If there's partners in the Sonoran Desert, whether it be the Department of Forest and Fire Management, the tribal nations, the schools, that could look at it broader. But for the sake of this conversation, we are looking at preservation in that left column. That is a really good way of telling that story.
So maybe if we even called it preservation monitoring, and then had a bucket for research, and because I think I feel that's very explainable, that we're monitoring the preserve to ensure that we preserve it forever. That's one of our guiding principles. And so having money that's directly associated with that, and not calling it research, because research is much harder to explain.
So just perhaps in the short term, it sounds like what we're looking is leaning towards that preservation thought. And again, a different bucket perhaps for research that is different than perhaps the preservation. But I don't think it would hurt to have that for the presentation for the council.
So I think what we can do, and the other thing I was thinking is we can go back to the existing ERP, which has some nice language in it as well, that we didn't spend a lot of time going back and pulling. And, and the other thing that I didn't really focus on is the very last category over here, which is the update of the ERP. And so I think that, and that's in these slides. So I just kind of went fast through it, but, and the reason that's got a slightly different color there is working with Assistant City Manager Bill Murphy, we are going to be proposing a general fund 22-23. So that would be next July, that we would look to immediately initiate an update. Now, again, I can't promise you that, but making it part of this presentation, putting it in front of the council is ahead of the budget process is a great way to build a little support for it. And so it was consistent with everything that we'd talked about. And I think we can work a little bit on massaging some language and have some options for the chair next week. And we can send that out to everybody as well. I don't know what time Justin has, but we'll get together somehow and talk through that. But I mean, Scott and I we've all had some of these discussions slightly off the side, and there are a lot of hot buttons, unfortunately, with some of these things. And what does sustainable mean, or what does that mean? But I think the preservation and the monitoring of the status, and I was going back, I mean, and these aren't perfectly worded yet, but the long-term monitoring of the flora and fauna and the impacts of the impacts, the pieces are all there.
Right.
And I think we just need to think about how we can frame that in a way that, because ultimately less about whether it's a hot button or not. We want people to understand this. If
Right.
this is going to go to the citizens for a vote, the bottom line isn't whether it's the right way to spin it or not. The right way is, have they got access to the information so they, if they choose, can educate themselves and understand what it means. And that, I think, is really what our
That's
long-term
critical.
goal would be.
And the other thing is, I would say, because we only have 15, maybe if we're lucky, 20 minutes in front of the council, we want to make sure that our words count. And I don't want a word out there that is nebulous, for sure. We want to make sure that they totally get what we're talking about in these proposed numbers. Does that make sense to everybody? So are we on the right track? Is everybody feeling positive about what we just conversed about? All right, good night. Good.
So, yep. I'm not moving off. I brought my question mark back.
So I have another question.
Yeah,
before you get to the
That's quite all right.
Commissioner Olson here. This actually pertains to this section as well as the next few sections. But first off, it took me a while to consume this, but I like it. I mean, it's on track with my thinking, so I feel good about this. But one thing I feel like it's lost. We had 3 numbers that Justin, provided. Current state. If you had the Conservancy doing the work, and then if you didn't have the Conservancy doing the work, we're missing in this how the Conservancy participates to bring these numbers down. I believe these numbers are based on the middle column of Justin's, or are they based on the largest number?
No, they're the middle.
And I almost wonder if, I'm not sure, I mean, I'm open to ideas about it, but do we need to spread that, make the third column into 2 columns, one that shows MSC Conservancy resources dedicated to it? Because they're on the hook for this. I mean, because if they don't show up, you're going to be short getting things done.
Right.
Well, and we talked about it, and much like up above in 1, how it was 250 plus, we knew if we put that 2B number up there, it could just turn so many people off, that by using the high as the high end with us, it saved the thought of putting a 4M number up there. Would that be enough just to have people walk away from the table?
And maybe it's a footnote that assumes a volunteer workforce.
That's
or
a
something.
speaking point.
Because
yeah,
it's
a speaking
missing that.
point.
It doesn't really show it. Because the way it reads now is that all is up on the operations line. And I don't know, how do we say it's actually, if we do this, you're saying it's going to be bigger than 1.5 and it's peanut butter spread across these things.
Because that was one of the things that Croy and Scott and I and Bill talked about, was we want to make sure we also just don't turn people off by coming out of the gate with a number that even any of us wouldn't expect we'd ever need to get to.
Right.
So that's why we looked at this number, but that footnote idea of the Conservancy could be very supportive of. Because the other thing that we were very sensitive to is, because this is a process that we're intimately involved in, we want to make sure that it's impartial and fair and doesn't reflect that it is the Conservancy. And one of the most articulate points that we pointed out, if you remember at the last meeting, of saying, we would love to have marketing dollars included with this, understanding we're not a marketing company. So bring another group to the table. We've already talked about when we do with the ERP update, that the Conservancy would just be a person up at the table. We wouldn't fully manage the ERP like we did in the first round, because it could be
Mhm.
politically sensitive.
Right.
So we fully
Good choice.
anticipate that if that budget package for 200,000 is approved, that's not Conservancy dollars. That is for other partners to come in, and we are a stakeholder at the table.
And I don't mean to always assume the stewards or the Conservancy is going to do it. And that's why I use the word volunteer. This assumes volunteer hours.
Yes.
And I think that ERP process will also allow us to get deeper into these numbers, and
Totally,
we may be
totally.
high as it is. And
Totally.
not criticizing it, just, I think we've all been trying to be, some mix of conservative and rational and politically sensitive. And so again, I'll go back to the fact that I feel really comfortable that this is presenting to the council a range that if we go to that base assumption that we're not trying to solve every problem that we may face in the future, but the base, then I think you're really putting something in front of the council that they can, if we get something in that range, I think we're going to be in a very good stead. And again, don't ever think that this is one shot and done. As I said, there's another tax that comes up in 2034. And there's other opportunities for going to the voters for other ways of funding this, or the general fund, as we're proposing with the ERP. So keep that flexibility in that regard in mind. But I'm not, the numbers that I'd written down last time, and again, there were a lot going around. This was in the range of those numbers, and that's kind of what I focused in on. And if that's a mistake, that's perfectly fine. I can correct that. But I think this seemed to be fitting in with that discussion. And Scott and Justin and I spent a little bit of time beating this up to see if it, and we were kind of like you, Commissioner. It's like, well, does this work? And the more we, I think, spent time on it, the more it seemed to really have a way of getting the message across to the council well. It takes a little bit to consume it all. I mean, we've all been working on it for months or years.
Yeah.
And
it still
so
took.
the next round, I may even try and simplify it a little more for the council, because it's going to be a lot to just put this out on the table. But we will do our best to tell the story in as easy a way as possible to get that across in a short period of time.
I think definitely simplifying it for the council so that, again, it's manageable. So they don't have to go through what we go through, which is trying to digest all of this, which is a
Yep.
lot. And so again, making all of our words count when we're in front of the council is critical, and making sure that we have the most reasonable way of doing that with large buckets. They're not concerned about the minutia at this point. So, yeah,
Well,
I think we're on the right track for sure.
And Commissioner Olson, if just thinking in how you had thought earlier, if it was just adding one plus sign behind each of those for the illustration, like we're doing with the 250, that might accomplish the same.
And it does show up. all
Because the
way.
plus is all the way down at the bottom.
There is one down here. And I-
Alternate fund source.
Yeah,
But the alternate,
those
the
red.
alternate fund source includes volunteer work.
Well, but it's, and we can chat some more about, is there an additional volunteer increase? Because I was trying to imply with that volunteer value, a different thing.
Which
But-
that was my question at the
Yeah.
beginning of Justin,
And
because I
that's-
wasn't sure whether the 1.5, because
Right.
the way I understood it, that's kind of like all of the hours that the Conservancy is donating forward.
Right.
Well, if that is already used and the work with the Soden, it takes more, then that was my question to him. So that's why I needed clarification.
But
for
I
that.
think that could be included in the red line in the plus, that value increases there, or is it an increase in dollars that's needed if it's not in volunteers? And that's just getting into a lot of detail that I'm not sure the council needs this first time, but
It's,
They
It's not
definitely
the
don't want
detail.
that at this point. They definitely want more high level.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not the detail of the number or the value of it. It's just the concept that to get here, the city's going to put money in, the volunteers are going to put time in, and we're going to get matching funds. And that's what makes the bucket.
Well, and Commissioner Olson, we were supportive of this presentation because the way Croy outlined it, if it was the 2.1, then the 2.7, and then the 1.7, that gets us to the number to accomplish everything plus the 1.5.
Yep.
So that 1.7 plus the 1.5 gets us up to the 3.0, the big number I had on my screen. So those are separate numbers.
I feel like you're double counting, but
Oh.
I agree with the numbers you
Yeah.
just stated.
Okay.
I'm good.
So we're good.
I'm good.
All right.
we'll move on to corridor protection. And again, this was,
Want to ask the question? Mark?
oh, I thought I heard you, we were good.
Well, I didn't hear anybody else.
I
I
heard
saw
we
some
were
head
good.
nods.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Okay.
I saw
Yep.
head nodding.
I figure if they're not, they're going to throw something at me. I'm an old planner, so
They're
Rotten
getting ready to run me out
Tomatoes,
of the
all
room.
sorts of stuff. I'm good with that. So corridor protection, we've gone through this before. Again, we'll work on figuring some of this out in maybe a little cleaner fashion. But we had the 10 million plus on that. And then last meeting that seemed to be understanding. There's a wide range of things yet to come on that, but
It's
for
just
this-
it's a stake in the ground at this point.
that's right. And it's better than the 2 million that we had previously.
Correct.
So moving on to the invasive wildland and restoration. You've seen these before. We did. So in this area, there's another area where Scott and I were looking at this, I think all of this morning. And we did slightly upgrade the range on these. And it was as we looked at the whole chart. And previously this said 168,000 on the cost. And I just rounded that to 170 and then I gave it a little bit of range. And you don't have to recommend that, but it worked a little better in the low, medium, high concept. And I'm happy to change this back out. This did not change on the restoration on the one time. And I did slightly up. I think we had 100 to 125 on the monitoring and we went to 100 and 150. So I made a couple changes on the medium range because we didn't have that previously, and fitting it in, it just seemed to make a little more sense with the way we're doing it, but I'm happy to tweak it. But that was really the only change I made there. I did alter slightly a couple of the estimates over here, and we've been having experience in pursuing some grants and just looking at those. I made a couple fine tweaks to that, but conceptually, the low end is very consistent with what we had. The medium I augmented, and then nothing else really changed. So-
How's everybody feeling about that? I see a thumbs up. I see fine. Okay, excellent. We're moving on. Thank you.
Okay. So trailhead and trail master plans, and this is the one that we talked about last time. We're just going with the rough estimate on the ones that we know, not anything of future. And so with that, I went with the 12 million that had that 10 million future and a 22 total. So we've amended that to 12. And that was based on the discussion at the last meeting.
Could you please just kind of review how we arrived at 12 million?
Yep. So this includes this range of options. We've got ideas of shaded amphitheaters at Lost Dog and Gateway. We have restroom concept at the Sunrise Trailhead. The ultimate resolution of Ringtail and 104th and Bell, and that doesn't mean they have to be eliminated, but they could either be eliminated, there's restoration, or if they were kept, we need to upgrade them because they're dirt parking lot, they're not controlled. So either way, we need to do something with those. Both Tom's Thumb and Fraysfield have future water conversions to get restrooms in, resurfacing of equestrian areas and a little bit of parking at several locations is still yet to be done. I mean, we've accomplished many, but not all. And then there's some signage updates. There's some access trail control. That's that perimeter issue. We've got several
fencing.
miles of that.
The fencing.
The fencing,
Mhm.
and then some fairly limited, but and this we'd get into whether we need any more trails. But there are a few areas, and that's not a big part of this number. The trails is not, and boundary control. So that was, I have access and trail control and boundary. It's probably the same thing. I think I just realized as I read that. So, so that's to your question. That's where we've got that, and I can come back and give you kind of numbers, but they're very much rough estimates at this point.
Thank you.
Any questions about that change from 10 to 12 million, or are we good with that? Thumbs up, head shaking, yes. Okay, all right, we're good.
Okay. And then we had the cultural master plan. The discussion last time, we had it just at 33,000, put a range of 50 to 70. We kept the projected one-time cost at the 200 to 400. We'll find some additional examples that this is very tough, much like some of our earlier slides. We'll update these for the council. We won't make them read fine print. But Scott and I had some, and Commissioner Hackbarth may have some ideas as well, but we'll work on something on that makes it a little easier to digest in a quick presentation. And then we come back to this category here.
Okay, because what we talked about last time, we were at the 30, as I recalled, maybe it was
33,
33.
Yep.
And we wanted to double that. So we had it go up to 60. And I done some research, gotten some information from Commissioner Hackbarth, and I'm wondering if that's still apropos or if we should be looking just a tad higher on that,
Are we
even the
talking the
mid-range.
low or the medium? Because we've got
The-
50 to 70.
Right.
So I kind of split that difference a little bit. I had a bunch of numbers in there, and so I kind of went with that range, seemed to accommodate, but I'm, again, more than happy to.
When we go to the
Gotcha.
2 to 400,000, I'm sorry, what is that encompassing? Let me look at that.
That was
Oh,
really
that's
aimed at the
federal
project.
funding?
Yeah, that was that one-time cost for the project. The Browns Ranch.
Right.
area.
I don't know. It's just me. I feel like I'd like to see that go up to maybe an 80,000 number, just to give us a little bit more space in the middle.
On the high end.
60 to 80, yeah,
Okay.
versus 50 to 70.
That is easy to accommodate.
Okay. Any other questions? Are we okay with that on the cultural?
Okay.
All right, moving on.
Well, very good. We've made it through the chart. Now, the one thing I know that came up as a question, I believe it was Commissioner Olson, you asked about enforcement. And so what we're proposing, and I think I hinted at this the last time, we will come back with February, March timeframe presentations on that. There are some things that are ongoing right now in the upcoming budget process that we're not prepared to present yet. But they are working with the police department in particular, looking at some options and some things that would come in this next budget cycle. And so what I'll probably do is just add a row in here that says future to be determined. And we would address that. So we'll get feedback. We can identify to the council. It's an item that we're looking at, that we're going to get more detailed presentation and input from police and fire, and that we would bring that back. And so that was the idea. We wouldn't have it in time for this first council meeting, but the council's going to get it most likely in the budget process anyway. And so, and it'll probably be separately funded from this to begin with, the ideas that are being kicked around. So we'll bring that back. And have
I
that
would like to
discussion.
definitely see a line in there that just says this is being considered, or at least put it on the purview.
We'll figure out some way to add that to this table. And
Okay.
that's kind of what I meant, but I'd already done the chart and I wasn't going to go back and change them.
I don't blame you.
That's outstanding, Croy. Thank you.
So, yes, this was me being lazy at 3:30 this afternoon.
Okay,
Okay, so I got thumbs up on that one.
good to go.
And so this just brings us back. This one I did change the date to January 11th. We're working on confirming that. The presentation could be anywhere from like 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock in the evening. We'll just have to, we'll update you as we know. But council agendas are very difficult with the different things that can end up on them. And we're just now getting a good look at what might be out there.
Jason,
So
I will just block off the day
that's right.
and the evening.
That's right. Yep. So we'll work on that. Obviously, we refer back to this. This is, I had at the last meeting, we can refine this, but basically we're looking for the council to go through this and give all of us feedback as to are the topics right? Are the numbers in a range you're comfortable with? Do you have more detailed questions? Did we miss something? You don't like something? Whatever that is, that's what we'll be looking to get from them. And that, again, it's a work study session, much like this. They won't be giving us a vote, but they will be giving us head nods or, hey, I thought, and we may hear disparate opinions or we may have consensus. That's kind of the beauty of the process. We'll get that. And I think it's really important, as long as I've been working on this, we haven't had the council get a chance to chime in. And so that'll be, I think, the real value of this.
I think it's very important for sure. Thank you.
So with that brings us to the end. That's what I had. And so the only other thing is on the issue of presentation, we'll reform it and reformat it, but we'll certainly work with both Chair Wenstrom and former Chair McKeegan on that, and we'll take some input. We'll work with others as well and tweak that. But I think that's really what we're looking for. I appreciate your patience, your time, all the homework. I think 2 years ago, I started saying they got homework to do, and you've been very patient, and we appreciate that effort.
Questions from commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Olson.
Oh, one for me. I'm sorry, I forgot his name, the previous commissioner.
Jason McKeegan.
Jason McKeegan.
He hasn't been in all our meetings to hear our discussions, to hear our input. So how is he prepped for being in that meeting as a representative of this council?
Well, I think
Or this commission?
that's the chair's responsibility.
Okay.
And Jace was really meant more for some of that historical aspect of where this came, the original interest of the commission. You know, what we kind of had that one discussion about that this was, this rooted from some other interests and other things. And so that was really part of why having that, so that we represent the long history of the commission's interest in this topic that preceded anyone here on the commission, and certainly it's done with the acknowledgement of the chair, if she is comfortable with that or not. But that was the concept that we came up. And it's very similar to a presentation that I forget if it was 16 or 17 that we did to the council, where we had a previous chair, Hytel, and sitting chair Frost at the time, or vice versa. I have that reverse. I don't remember which. I think I had that right. But it was again for that context that there is this transition that occurs with the natural limitations on terms, and that was really part of what we were simply trying to do. So it came from a previous work study example, and we thought it might be a good way to carry that forward.
No, and I think he's a great resource for that. But if he starts representing his opinion of the budget process without
No.
being in the conversation.
No, he
wouldn't
will
be-
not.
Okay.
He will not.
Yep.
The other question I had is there any consideration? Is there any consideration for having Justin there? Because I know for one, Justin certainly speaks passionately about education and research. Are you going to be there?
It is tentatively in my calendar, like Chair Winstrom, for the day.
That'd be great. Would he be part of the presentation or just available for questions?
It's probably more a question. I mean, what's difficult in a short presentation is getting too many
Right.
presenters. And but yes, the thought would be we would have resources available to us, and there'd probably be, we may have, I don't know how many slides we'll have, but there'll probably be another 100 backing us up. Scott and I were talking about that you know, we've developed a lot of slides for all this, and there's no way we're showing the council all of them. But if they ask us a question, we might want to have a couple of those handy to pull them up and say, you know, you asked about what does it take to clean a restroom. We've got that
I
answer.
will
No,
never
don't go
live that
there.
down. I will never live that down.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I don't want to go. But,
Yes.
you know, that's just an example. There has been a tremendous range of great questions and answers that have been provided. And we do want to make sure that we have that information available to us.
Okay, and
And
Justin?
we will be there. But as someone who has presented to council before, that 20 minutes goes quick.
Yes,
And if they have questions, they will always go past that.
yes.
Yeah.
So I will be there, and as well, Melanie Toluchek, our Science and Education Director, will be joining me at that. So it won't be me dependent upon getting texts from my amazing team. There will be another person there that can answer any of the preservation and sustainability questions.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Excellent. All right, that was it for questions. Okay. Yes, it was kind of a directive. All right, so with all that wonderful discussion and a little bit of direction back to staff, I think, I'm going to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Commissioner Papalasco will do a motion to adjourn.
And a second, please.
Second, Marshall Lips.
Thank you very much. And let's vote on that. Commissioner, Vice Chair LaPat Palasco.
Approved to adjourn.
Okay. Commissioner Coluccio,
Coluccio approves.
Commissioner Hackbar,
Hackbarth approves.
Commissioner Lips,
Commissioner Lips approves.
Commissioner Olson,
With thanks to Croy, I approve.
Commissioner Smith,
Commissioner Smith approves.
and Chair Wenstrom approves. We have ended in less than 60 minutes.